She thought the storm would be her final escape, but someone was waiting for her in the desert, someone who knew pain just as deeply, and who would change everything. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. The blistering Arizona sun bore down on Sarah Matthews as she stood at the edge of her small homestead, staring out at the vast desert landscape stretching before her. 2 weeks had passed since she'd buried her husband Thomas, victim of an Apache raid on the supply wagon he'd been guarding. Now, at 27, she was alone in this harsh, unforgiving territory, with nothing but grief as her companion. Sarah brushed a strand of chestnut hair from her face, her once vibrant green eyes now dulled by sorrow. The wooden cross marking Thomas's grave cast a short shadow nearby. They'd only been married 3 years, having moved west from Pennsylvania with dreams of building a life together. "What am I supposed to do now, Thomas?" she whispered, her voice breaking. The wind carried her words away into the emptiness. Inside their modest cabin, everything reminded her of him. His boots by the door, his hat hanging on the peg, the chair he'd crafted with his own hands. Sarah had barely eaten in days, barely slept. The neighbors from the nearest homestead, nearly 5 miles away, had stopped checking on her after she'd turned them away repeatedly. That morning she'd made her decision. There was nothing left for her here. She'd sell what little they had and return east, back to her sister's home in Philadelphia. Or perhaps she wouldn't go back at all. The storm clouds gathering on the horizon seemed to mirror the darkness in her heart. Sarah packed a small bag with essentials, some food, a canteen of water, her husband's revolver. She wouldn't need much for what she had in mind. As she stepped outside, the wind picked up, sending dust swirling around her skirts. The approaching storm would be a fierce one. They always were in this territory. "Perfect," she murmured, a strange calm washing over her. Walking toward the darkening horizon, Sarah felt oddly peaceful. The pain would end soon. She would simply walk into the storm and let nature take its course. Hours passed as she trudged through the increasingly hostile terrain, the wind whipping her hair and stinging her face with sand. The sky had turned an ominous gray-green, and thunder rumbled in the distance. Sarah had no idea how far she'd come. She'd long since lost sight of her homestead. "Is this what you wanted, God?" she cried out, her voice lost in the howling wind. "To take everything from me?" The first heavy drops of rain began to fall as she stumbled up a rocky incline. Lightning flashed across the sky, briefly illuminating a dark figure standing on the ridge above her. Sarah froze, her hand moving to the revolver at her waist. The figure descended swiftly, and Sarah's breath caught when she realized it was an Apache man, tall and imposing, with long black hair and eyes that seemed to see right through her. She'd heard stories about the Apache, some of brutality, others of honor. "You walk to your death, white woman," he said in surprisingly clear English, his voice deep and steady despite the worsening storm. "That's the idea," Sarah replied, too exhausted and grief-stricken to be afraid. The man studied her face, the rain now falling in sheets around them. "Many spirits walk this desert," he said. "You wish to join them?" Lightning struck nearby, momentarily blinding them both. When Sarah's vision cleared, the Apache had moved closer, now just an arm's length away. "Do you still want to live?" he asked, his dark eyes searching her face. Sarah opened her mouth to say no, that she had nothing left, but the words wouldn't come. Something in his steady gaze held her, challenging her. I don't know," she finally whispered, and for the first time in weeks she felt something other than grief, a tiny spark of uncertainty about her decision. "I am Nahilzai," he said. "It means, he who is skilled. Come with me now, or die in this storm. Your choice must be quick." The rain was coming down harder, and the ground beneath their feet had already turned to mud. Flash floods could sweep through these areas in minutes. Sarah looked back in the direction she had come, though her homestead was long out of sight. Then she turned toward the unknown path ahead, toward the stranger who had appeared like an apparition in the storm. "I'll come with you," she said, her voice strengthening despite her uncertainty. Nahilzai nodded once and turned, expecting her to follow. Sarah hesitated only a moment before hurrying after him, the storm raging around them as they made their way through the wild Arizona landscape, toward what future she couldn't begin to imagine. Nahilzai moved with the confidence of one who knew the land intimately, navigating the treacherous terrain despite the blinding storm. Sarah struggled to keep pace, her skirts heavy with rain and mud, her boots sliding on the slick rocks. Several times she nearly fell, but each time Nahilzai's hand shot out to steady her, firm but not unkind. They traveled for what seemed like hours, the storm growing more violent around them. Eventually, Nahilzai led her to a shallow cave tucked into the side of a cliff. It wasn't deep, but it provided shelter from the worst of the wind and rain. Without a word, he gathered some dry brush from the back of the cave and started a small fire. The dancing flames cast shadows across his face as he settled across from her. In the firelight, Sarah could see him clearly for the first time. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp features and a quiet intensity in his eyes. A scar ran along his jawline, and various symbols were painted on his buckskin clothing. "Why were you walking in the storm?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sarah stared into the fire. "My husband was killed 2 weeks ago," she said flatly. "There was nothing left for me." Nahilzai nodded slowly. "So you sought death?" "Yes." Sarah met his gaze defiantly. "What business is it of yours?" "None," he replied simply. "But the spirits brought me to you. That makes it my concern now." Sarah scoffed. "Spirits? I stopped believing in anything like that when they put my husband in the ground." Nahilzai studied her for a long moment. "Your husband? How did he die?" Sarah swallowed hard. "Apache raid. On the supply wagon heading to Fort Verde." The words tasted bitter in her mouth. "He was just trying to earn extra money for our homestead." She expected anger or defense from Nahilzai, but his expression remained unchanged. "Not my people," he said. "The Chiricahua, perhaps, or renegades. There are many Apache bands, not all friends." "Does it matter?" Sarah asked bitterly. "He's still dead." "It matters to know your true enemy," Nahilzai replied. "I am Western Apache. We have treaty with white soldiers now." Sarah fell silent, watching the flames. Outside, the storm continued to rage, thunder cracking so loudly it seemed to shake the very stone around them. "You have family?" Nahilzai asked after a while. "A sister in Philadelphia, far to the east." Nahilzai nodded. "And you would leave without saying goodbye?" The question struck Sarah like a physical blow. The thought of Mary receiving news of her death, after already mourning their parents and now Thomas, sent a wave of shame through her. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "Everything I've built here, everything I dreamed of, it's gone now." "I understand loss," Nahilzai said, his voice taking on a new depth. "My wife and son died 3 winters ago. Fever brought by white settlers." There was no accusation in his tone, simply statement of fact. Sarah looked up at him, suddenly seeing him differently. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. Nahilzai shrugged. "I also wished to walk into death. My father, a medicine man, stopped me, said I had purpose still. He poked at the fire with a stick. Perhaps that purpose was to stop you today." They fell into silence again, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howling of the storm outside. Sarah's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, grief still dominant, but now tinged with confusion and the faintest hint of shame. "Rest," Nahilzai eventually said. "Storm will pass by morning. Then we decide what comes next." Sarah wanted to argue that there was no we, that she hadn't asked for his interference, but exhaustion suddenly overwhelmed her. She leaned against the cave wall, wrapping her arms around herself against the chill. To her surprise, Nahilzai removed his outer leather wrap and handed it to her. "Take this. White women not made for desert nights." Too tired to refuse, Sarah accepted it, pulling the unexpectedly soft hide around her shoulders. It smelled of smoke, sage, and open air. "Thank you," she murmured. "Why are you helping me?" Nahilzai was silent for so long that Sarah thought he might not answer. Finally he spoke, his eyes on the fire rather than on her. "When great grief comes, we cannot see the path ahead. We need another's eyes for a time." He glanced at her then. "Sleep now. Tomorrow your spirit may be stronger." Despite her intention to stay alert, she was, after all, in a cave with a stranger, An Apache, no less. Sarah's eyes grew heavy. The rhythm of the rain, the warmth of the fire, and the sheer emotional exhaustion of the past weeks pulled her towards sleep. Her last conscious thought before drifting off was that this was the first time since Thomas's death that she hadn't felt completely alone. Morning came with startling brightness, the storm having washed the desert air clean. Sarah woke with a momentary disorientation, forgetting where she was until her eyes fell on Nahilzai, standing at the mouth of the cave, scanning the horizon. "The rain has stopped," he said, sensing her awakening without turning. "We should move before the sun climbs too high." Sarah sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her back and legs. "Move where?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep. Now Nahilzai turned to face her. "That depends on you, Sarah Matthews. Do you still wish to die?" The question, asked so directly in the clear light of morning, made Sarah flinch. The despair that had driven her into the storm hadn't disappeared, but something had shifted subtly within her. "I don't know," she answered honestly. Nahilzai nodded, as if her answer satisfied him. "Then we go to see Gojuni, the white-painted woman. She will help you find your answer." They traveled for 2 days across the rugged terrain, Nahilzai setting a pace that was challenging but not impossible for Sarah to maintain. He spoke little, but when he did, his observations were insightful, often surprising her with his knowledge of both Apache ways and the changing world around them. "You speak English very well," Sarah remarked as they stopped to rest near a small spring on the afternoon of the second day. Nahilzai cupped water in his hands and drank before answering. "I was taken to the white man's school as a boy. 5 years at Carlisle in Pennsylvania." Sarah's eyebrows rose in surprise. "Carlisle? That's not far from where I grew up." "Different worlds. Same land," Nahilzai said with a wry smile that transformed his usually stoic features. "They tried to make me forget my people's ways, but when I returned, my grandfather retaught me everything." "Your grandfather sounds like a wise man." "He was, a respected medicine man until the soldiers came." A shadow passed across Nahilzai's face. "Now we live on the reservation, not all of us. Some fight still, some try to walk between worlds like me." Sarah considered his words. "Is that where we're going? The reservation?" Nahilzai shook his head. "No. Gojuni, white-painted woman, she lives apart. In the sacred mountains, she is very old, very wise. Not many white people have seen her." "Why would she want to see me?" Sarah asked. "She has dreams. She sees things coming." Nahilzai shouldered his small pack. "She asked me to bring you." Sarah froze. How could she ask you to bring me if she didn't know I existed? Nahilzai looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "She described you. Woman with fire hair and green eyes, walking into storm with death in her heart." He gestured for them to continue. "I do not question Gojuni's visions." A chill ran through Sarah despite the warm afternoon sun. She followed Nahilzai in silence, unsettled by his words. Either this Apache medicine woman had some extraordinary power of foresight, or Nahilzai was leading her into a trap. Yet something, instinct perhaps, told her to trust him. As the sun began to set, they came upon a small, hidden valley tucked between two rugged cliffs. A creek ran through it, and several sturdy structures made of wood and earth stood near a large cottonwood tree. Smoke curled from one of the buildings. "This is Apache land," Nahilzai said quietly. "Sacred ground. Few white people have stood here." Sarah felt a strange mixture of privilege and trepidation as they approached. Before they reached the first dwelling, an elderly woman emerged from the largest structure. Even at a distance, she radiated a presence that commanded respect. Her silver hair was woven with feathers and beads, and her face was mapped with the lines of many decades of life. She spoke to Nahilzai in Apache, her voice surprisingly strong. He answered respectfully, gesturing toward Sarah. Then the woman switched to English, her accent thick but her words clear. "Come closer, fire-hair woman," she said. "I am Gojuni." Sarah approached slowly, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance after days of travel. "I'm Sarah Matthews," she said. "Nahilzai says you expected me." Gojuni's dark eyes, sharp despite her age, studied Sarah intently. "The spirits show me things," she said simply. "You carry great pain." "My husband." "Yes, but older pain too." The old woman gestured toward her dwelling. "Come." Eat. Rest. Then we talk. Inside, the home was surprisingly comfortable, with woven rugs covering the packed earth floor and a central fire pit that provided both warmth and light. Several other Apache women were present, and they served a simple but hearty meal of beans, corn cakes, and dried fruit. Sarah ate gratefully, realizing how hungry she was. The others spoke in Apache occasionally, but mostly there was a comfortable silence. After the meal, the younger women departed, leaving Sarah alone with Gojuni and Nahilzai. "Now," the old woman said, fixing her penetrating gaze on Sarah, "you thought to let the storm take you, to join your husband in death." Sarah looked down at her hands. "Yes, this is not your path." Gojuni's tone was matter-of-fact. "The spirits have work for you still." "What kind of work?" Sarah asked skeptically. "I'm just a farmer's widow with nothing left." Gojuni smiled, revealing surprisingly strong teeth. "You are more. You have healer's hands." Sarah's head snapped up. "How did you know that?" "The spirits—" "No," Sarah interrupted. "How did you really know? Did Nahilzai tell you I used to assist the doctor back in Philadelphia?" Nahilzai shook his head. "I knew nothing of this." Gojuni continued as if Sarah hadn't spoken. "Your people need healing. My people need healing, not just of body." "I don't understand," Sarah said, frustration edging her voice. "You will." The old woman reached for a leather pouch and extracted several dried herbs, which she tossed onto the fire. The flames flared blue-green, and a sweet, earthy aroma filled the space. "Sleep now. Tomorrow we begin." Sarah wanted to protest, to demand clearer answers, but a sudden wave of exhaustion washed over her. She barely made it to the pallet Gojuni indicated, before falling into a deep sleep filled with vivid dreams. She dreamed of Thomas, but not as she had last seen him, broken and bloodied. Instead, he was smiling, telling her it was all right to continue without him. She dreamed of her hands glowing with light, touching wounded soldiers, frightened children, elderly Apache. She dreamed of a school, of books, of laughter. When she woke the next morning, the images lingered, leaving her with an unfamiliar feeling, a tentative hope. Gojuni was already awake, sitting cross-legged near the rekindled fire. "Your dreams were strong," she said without preamble. "How do you know what I dreamed?" Sarah asked, sitting up. "Your face tells me, and the spirits." The old woman handed her a cup of hot tea. "Today you will see. Tomorrow you will decide." After a simple breakfast, Gojuni led Sarah out of the dwelling. Nahilzai was nowhere to be seen. "Where is Nahilzai?" Sarah asked, surprised by her disappointment at his absence. "He has other duties. He will return." Gojuni led her through the small settlement, introducing her to several Apache families who lived there. To Sarah's surprise, many were ill or injured. A child with fever, an old man with a festering wound on his leg, a young woman struggling to breathe. "They do not go to the agency, doctor," Gojuni explained. "They do not trust, but they suffer." Without thinking, Sarah knelt beside the feverish child, feeling his forehead, checking his pulse as she'd been taught. "He needs willow bark tea for the fever," she said, "and cool compresses." Gojuni nodded approvingly and spoke to the mother in Apache. Soon Sarah found herself applying her limited medical knowledge, moving from one patient to another. The Apache were initially wary, but under Gojuni's watchful eye, they allowed her to examine and treat them. Hours passed and Sarah barely noticed, absorbed in the work. It felt right in a way nothing had since Thomas's death. By late afternoon, when they finally stopped, Sarah was exhausted, but exhilarated. "You see now," Gojuni said, as they walked back toward her dwelling. "Your hands remember their purpose." Sarah couldn't deny it. For the first time in weeks, she had felt truly useful, truly present. The grief was still there, a constant ache, but it had receded enough to allow other emotions to surface. "There are many who need your skills," Gojuni continued. "Apache, white settlers, Mexican families. The nearest real doctor is at Fort Verde. 2 days' ride." "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to understand. "That you have purpose still, Sarah Matthews, that your life is not finished." The old woman stopped, turning to face her directly. "Tomorrow, Nahilzai will return. He will take you back to your homestead if that is what you wish. Or, Sarah prompted when she paused, or you begin a new path, one that serves both your people and mine. Gojuni's eyes held a challenge. Tonight, listen to your dreams again. Tomorrow, you will choose. That night, Sarah lay awake for a long time, her mind racing. The thought of returning to her empty homestead still filled her with dread. Yet the alternative, staying here, among the Apache, using her skills to help others, seemed impossible for entirely different reasons. She was a white woman in Apache territory. Even with Nahilzai's protection and Gojuni's blessing, how could she possibly bridge such different worlds? When sleep finally came, her dreams were even more vivid than the night before. She saw herself older, lines of experience etching her face, standing between two groups of people, Apache and settlers, her hands extended to both, and beside her stood a tall figure she knew without seeing his face was Nahilzai. She woke at dawn with the certainty of purpose that had eluded her since Thomas's death. When Gojuni entered the dwelling a short time later, one look at Sarah's face told her everything. "You have chosen," the old woman said with satisfaction. "Yes," Sarah replied, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I want to stay. I want to help." Gojuni nodded, a rare smile lighting her weathered face. "Good. Nahilzai returns today. He will help you build your new life." "Nahilzai?" Sarah couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. "But surely he has his own duties, his own life. His path and yours are now joined," Gojuni said cryptically. "This too I have seen." Before Sarah could question her further, the sound of approaching horses drew them outside. Nahilzai was riding toward them, leading a second horse, Sarah's own mare, which she had left behind at her homestead. "How did he know?" Sarah asked in wonderment. Gojuni chuckled. "He did not, but I did." She patted Sarah's arm. "Go now. Your journey is just beginning." Nahilzai dismounted as they approached, his expression unreadable as always. "You have decided?" he asked Sarah directly. "Yes," she said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I want to stay, to help your people and mine." Something flickered in his dark eyes, approval perhaps, or relief. "It will not be easy," he warned. "Many on both sides will not understand." "I know," Sarah acknowledged, "but it's the right path. I feel it." Nahilzai nodded once. "Then we begin." He handed her the reins to her horse. "I brought your things, what I could carry." Sarah stroked the mare's neck, unexpectedly moved by this gesture. "Thank you," she said softly. Then, gathering her courage, she asked, "Gojuni says our paths are joined now. What does that mean to you?" For the first time since she'd met him, Nahilzai looked momentarily uncertain. "It means I will help you build this bridge between our peoples," he said carefully. "Beyond that?" He shrugged. "Time will show us." Sarah nodded, accepting this answer for now. The future stretched before her, uncertain, but no longer empty. As she mounted her horse ready to follow Nahilzai to whatever came next, she felt Thomas's presence one last time, not as a ghost pulling her toward death, but as a memory blessing her choice to live. The sun rose higher, illuminating the path ahead as they rode side by side into a future neither could have imagined just days before. 1 year later, Sarah stood in the doorway of her new home, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of orange and purple. The small wooden structure sat on the edge of neutral territory, close enough to the Apache settlement to serve their needs, yet accessible to settlers from nearby homesteads and the travelers who passed through on the way to Fort Verde. In the past year, she had built more than a clinic. She had built a life that, while different from anything she had envisioned, fulfilled her in ways she hadn't known were possible. Thinking deep thoughts? Nahilzai's voice broke through her reverie as he approached from the corral where he'd been tending to the horses. In the fading light, his tall figure moved with the same grace that had first caught her attention during the storm. Sarah smiled. Just grateful, I suppose, for all of this. She gestured to the clinic, the small garden they had planted, the peaceful landscape surrounding them. Nahilzai came to stand beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth in the cooling evening air. "The moon of changing leaves is almost upon us," he said, using the Apache term for autumn. 1 year since you walked into the storm. And you asked if I still wanted to live. Sarah finished softly. I didn't know then how much I would have to live for. Their eyes met, and the understanding that had grown between them over the months hung in the air, unspoken but undeniable. Nahilzai had been her constant companion, her protector, her friend, and gradually something more, though neither had put it into words yet. The sound of approaching horses interrupted the moment. Sarah squinted into the distance, making out 3 riders coming from the direction of the reservation. Yellow Feather, Nahilzai identified the lead rider, and 2 others. His voice took on an edge of concern. Yellow Feather was one of the Apache who had initially resisted Sarah's presence among them, suspicious of any white person's intentions. Over time, a grudging respect had developed between them, especially after Sarah had successfully treated Yellow Feather's youngest daughter for pneumonia. The riders approached rapidly, and it was clear something was wrong. Yellow Feather dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his expression grave. Nahilzai, healer woman. He addressed them in English out of respect for Sarah. Soldiers come, many soldiers from Fort Verde. Sarah's heart sank. Relations with the fort had been tentative at best. The commanding officer, Colonel Barrett, viewed any interaction with the Apache with suspicion, and Sarah's choice to live at the boundary and treat both populations had made her an object of distrust. When? Nahilzai asked, his body tensing. Tomorrow, maybe sooner. Scouts saw them preparing. Yellow Feather looked directly at Sarah. They say you steal medicine from fort. They say you spy for Apache. That's ridiculous, Sarah exclaimed. I've purchased every supply fairly, and I treat anyone who needs help, settler and Apache alike. Truth does not matter to men like Barrett, Nahilzai said grimly. They seek only excuses. Yellow Feather nodded in agreement. There is more. They say Nahilzai raided supply wagons last spring. Say they have witness. Sarah turned to Nahilzai, whose face had hardened into an unreadable mask. That's impossible, she said. Nahilzai was with me treating patients in the northern settlements then. We know this, Yellow Feather said, but soldiers believe what they want to believe. He hesitated. Some say you should leave, healer woman. Go back to your people before trouble comes. Sarah straightened her back. I am exactly where I belong, she said firmly. We've done nothing wrong. I'll speak with Colonel Barrett myself. No. Nahilzai's voice was sharp. Barrett is not a reasonable man. He wants excuse to move against our people. Then what do you suggest? Sarah asked, trying to keep the fear from her voice. Before Nahilzai could answer, another sound caught their attention. A lone rider approaching from the opposite direction, from the trail that led to the nearest white settlement. As the rider drew closer, Sarah recognized Mrs. Henderson, the wife of one of the homesteaders whose child Sarah had delivered just months earlier. Sarah, thank God you're here, Mrs. Henderson called out as she reined in her horse. She cast a nervous glance at the Apache men but continued urgently. I've come to warn you. Colonel Barrett is gathering men. They're saying terrible things, that you've gone native, that you're helping the Apache plan raids. She took a breath. Some are even saying you had something to do with your husband's death, that you planned it with him. She nodded toward Nahilzai. A cold rage filled Sarah. Thomas was killed by raiders before I ever met Nahilzai, she said tightly. Mrs. Henderson nodded quickly. I know that, Sarah. Those of us you've helped, we know the truth. But Barrett's been drinking and he's got the men all fired up. She twisted her hands anxiously. John, my husband, he sent me to tell you to leave just for a while, until things calm down. Sarah looked from Mrs. Henderson to Yellow Feather, then to Nahilzai. The tension was palpable, the threat real. Everything she had built over the past year was in danger. I won't run, she said finally. This is my home now, our home. She looked meaningfully at Nahilzai. We haven't done anything wrong. Nahilzai's eyes held hers, a complex mix of emotions passing between them. If you stay, he said quietly, you must be prepared for what may come. I am, Sarah replied with more confidence than she felt. Mrs. Henderson looked distressed. At least let me take some of your things, your medical supplies, your personal items. John and I can keep them safe for you. After a moment's consideration, Sarah nodded. That would be wise, thank you. She turned to Yellow Feather. Please tell your people to stay away for a few days. I don't want anyone caught in the middle of this. Yellowfeather inclined his head in agreement. Be careful, healer woman. Barrett is a snake with two tongues. As Yellowfeather and his companions rode off, Sarah and Nahilze helped Mrs. Henderson load some of Sarah's most valuable medical supplies and personal keepsakes onto her horse. God be with you both, Mrs. Henderson said as she mounted up. John and some of the others will try to reason with Barrett, but she left the sentence unfinished, her worried expression saying more than words could. After she had gone, Sarah and Nahilze stood in silence for a long moment, watching the last light fade from the sky. You should go with her, Nahilze said finally. This is not your fight. Sarah turned to face him fully. It became my fight the day you asked me if I still wanted to live, she said. Everything I care about is here now. She took a deep breath, including you. The words hung between them, a declaration that had been building for months. Nahilze's expression softened, and he reached out to touch her cheek gently. Sarah Matthews, he said, his voice deep with emotion. You have the bravest heart I have ever known. Is that the only reason you stay by my side? She asked, her own heart pounding. Instead of answering with words, Nahilze leaned down and kissed her softly. It was their first kiss, tentative yet filled with the understanding and respect that had grown between them over the past year. When they parted, Sarah felt a certainty she hadn't experienced since before Thomas's death. Whatever came tomorrow, they would face it together. They spent the night preparing as best they could, securing the clinic, gathering what evidence they had of Sarah's legitimate business dealings, and discussing various possibilities for the confrontation to come. Dawn broke clear and crisp, the autumn air carrying a hint of the winter to come. Sarah had just finished brewing coffee when they heard it, the unmistakable sound of multiple horses and men approaching. Nahilze moved to the window. At least 20 soldiers, he reported grimly. Barrett leads them. Sarah smoothed her skirts and tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Let me speak to them first, she said. They might listen to one of their own. Nahilze looked like he wanted to argue but nodded. I will be right behind you. They stepped onto the porch together as Colonel Barrett and his men rode into the yard. The colonel was a burly man with a florid face and cold eyes. He surveyed the scene with obvious contempt. Sarah Matthews, he called out without dismounting. You are ordered to vacate these premises immediately. This structure stands on contested land and will be demolished. Sarah stepped forward. Colonel Barrett, this clinic serves both settler and Apache communities. It breaks no law and violates no treaty. Barrett's expression darkened. You have no authority here, woman. And your companion, he sneered the word, eyeing Nahilze, is wanted for questioning regarding raids on supply wagons. That's a lie, Sarah said firmly. Nahilze was with me treating patients during those raids. We have witnesses. Apache witnesses don't count, Barrett spat. And white women who lie with savages have no credibility either. A murmur ran through the soldiers at this insult. Some looked uncomfortable, others contemptuous. Sarah felt her face flush with anger but kept her voice steady. You dishonor yourself and your uniform with such accusations, Colonel. We have done nothing but help people in need, including many of your own men who've sought treatment here. Barrett's face grew redder. Enough. Men, secure the savage. Mrs. Matthews will be escorted back to the fort for her own protection. As several soldiers dismounted and moved toward them, Nahilze tensed beside Sarah, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. Wait, a new voice called out, and Sarah turned to see John Henderson riding toward them, accompanied by several other settlers, men and women whom Sarah had treated, whose children she had delivered, whose wounds she had healed. Colonel Barrett, Henderson said as he reached them, you're making a mistake. Mrs. Matthews and Nahilze have been nothing but a blessing to this community. Stay out of this, Henderson, Barrett warned. This is military business. No, it's our business. Another settler, old Mr. Perkins, spoke up. This woman saved my wife's life when your fort doctor was too drunk to help. And that Apache man beside her helped rebuild my barn after the fire last spring. More settlers added their voices, forming a protective circle around Sarah and Nahilze. To Sarah's amazement, she saw Yellowfeather and several other Apache approaching cautiously from the other direction, drawn by the commotion despite her warning to stay away. Barrett's face contorted with fury. This is insubordination. I'll have you all arrested for interfering with military operations. On what grounds, Colonel? The new voice belonged to a man in an army uniform who pushed through the crowd of settlers. Sarah recognized him as Captain Richards, the fort's second-in-command, a fair man whom she had treated for a broken arm months earlier. Captain Richards, Barrett spluttered. What are you doing here? You were not ordered to. I received a telegram from the territorial governor this morning, Richards interrupted, holding up a piece of paper. It seems several citizens have lodged complaints about your conduct, Colonel. The governor has ordered an immediate investigation and has temporarily relieved you of command. A stunned silence fell over the gathering. Barrett's face went from red to purple. This is outrageous. These people are harboring hostiles, disrupting the natural order. The natural order, Colonel, Richards said firmly, is that all people deserve fair treatment and medical care. Mrs. Matthews has provided that without discrimination. He turned to address the soldiers. Men, escort Colonel Barrett back to the fort. He is confined to quarters pending investigation. For a tense moment, it seemed Barrett might resist, but faced with the combined presence of settlers, Apache, and his own second-in-command, he finally backed down. This isn't over, he growled as two soldiers reluctantly approached to escort him. Actually, Colonel, I believe it is, Captain Richards replied evenly. As Barrett was led away, the tension in the air gradually dissipated. Settlers and Apache regarded each other warily but without hostility. It was, Sarah realized, perhaps the first time the two groups had stood side by side for a common purpose. Captain Richards approached Sarah and Nahilze. Mrs. Matthews, I apologize for this incident. The Colonel's behavior has been increasingly erratic, and I should have acted sooner. Thank you, Captain, Sarah said sincerely. What happens now? The governor has appointed me acting commander until a permanent replacement arrives, Richards explained. I can assure you that your clinic will be protected and, he glanced at Nahilze, previous accusations will be dismissed for lack of evidence. After the captain and his men departed, and the settlers and Apache began to disperse, Sarah found herself standing in the yard with Nahilze, surrounded by the life they had built together. What are you thinking? She asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. I am thinking, he said slowly, that Gojuni's vision was true. You have begun to build a bridge between our peoples. Sarah took his hand, no longer concerned who might see. We built it together, she corrected gently. Nahilze smiled, a full smile that transformed his face. Yes, he agreed, and there is more to build still. He looked at her questioningly. If you wish it. Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, from the depths of grief to the precipice of a new beginning. She thought of Thomas, who would always hold a place in her heart, and of Nahilze, who had shown her that her heart was big enough for new love. I do wish it, she said softly. As the autumn sun rose higher in the Arizona sky, Sarah and Nahilze stood together at the threshold of not just a clinic, but a future where understanding might gradually replace suspicion, and healing might extend beyond wounds of the body to the deeper divisions between peoples. It would not be easy. They both knew that. But as Nahilze had asked her a year ago in the midst of a storm, did she still want to live? The answer now was an unequivocal yes, with all the challenges and joys that life would bring. Hand in hand, they walked back into the home they had created, ready to face whatever came next, together.